Hello, everybody, and welcome to a really exciting webinar with some fantastic panelists that I'm really looking forward to hosting today. So thank you so much for joining us on moving beyond first impressions and really winning the trust of candidates. So when you signed up to this, you probably saw some of the stats around how much research people are doing into their next employers. And that's a super relevant topic for me to be talking about. So by way of introduction, I'm Molly. I am the CEO and co-founder at Flexa. And Flexa is the platform that enables people to understand what it's like at a company before they join there, or probably most importantly, to discover companies based on what makes them unique. Whether that's dog-friendly offices, career progression, amazing cultures, we have all sorts of things that our 4 million users look for their companies for. So without further ado, I've got my wonderful panelists here. So I will leave you to introduce yourselves. Amanda, could you go first?
Hi, everybody. So my name is Amanda. I'm the candidate marketing lead for the UK. I look after early talent, experience hire, and alumni. And my role is to essentially make sure that Accenture is known as the employer of choice to our target market. And also really to talk about inclusivity. So making sure people feel included and connected to the work that they do. So yeah, it's probably me in a nutshell.
Super. And Yasmin, could you go next?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, hi everyone. My name's Yasmin. I'm the head of customer experience at Connected Talent Technology. Our mission is really about helping employers to find the right talent, the best talent for their business. We do that through our candidate experience and pre-boarding platforms. So these can be deployed from attraction through to kind of pre-boarding, onboarding stage. And the way this works is all about candidate empowerment. So kind of bite-sized, personalized content, digital advocacy, community spaces, all these different ways to help candidates feel informed about who they're potentially choosing as their future employer. And my role really is about making sure our client partners have success with this and also are able to kind of achieve their strategic goals using our technology. A lot of this is based on doing research, some of which we're kind of talking about today, and just generally kind of connecting them with the wider industry and their audience.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. Sounds like a similar sort of mission, very much aligned to what we're doing at Flexa.
Yeah.
Kirsten, could you introduce yourself as well?
Yes. Hi, everyone. My name is Kirsten. I am the talent acquisition manager for our early careers at M&S. So I look after everything around the attraction and selection. So work with our employer branding to bring in the right candidates to select them into our roles. We look after graduates and apprenticeships across our business, which we very much have a focus on retail. So being in the retail world or in our support centre, but again with a retail focus on either food or clothing and home. And that's me.
Awesome. Thank you so much for joining. So everybody that is watching today, what we'll be doing is splitting this up into kind of the first bit will be discussion. We'll be chatting through all of the kind of data that we've seen around where candidates are looking, what are they looking for, what can companies do to adapt to this, why is it important from an employer brand, recruitment marketing and diversity and inclusion perspective as well. But we will leave time at the end for your questions. So please do pop them into the chat if you're wherever you're watching from, and then they will come up in my feed here. So then we'll leave the last sort of 10, 15 minutes to be able to answer your questions. So to kick off, we've seen lots of research that suggests that people spend on average about 2.5 hours researching their next prospective employer, and that is per company. So that is a lot of time when you're going from picking the company to apply to, doing your research to apply, and then throughout that interview process. So obviously that has a lot of repercussions for companies, and it's definitely a shift that has materialized much more probably in the last couple of years since the pandemic, where there is so much more variety when it comes to what companies offer. We're no longer, every company's 5 days a week in the office, same hours, and all you're differentiating between is job title or pay. You've got people looking at, whether there is enhanced maternity leave, what's the culture like? Is it a mission-driven organization? Is it carbon neutral or sustainable? Is it great for early careers, very relevantly? So have you seen that materialize in terms of candidates coming into interviews or the application process, knowing more about your company than they used to? And what does that look like in practice for each of your organizations? Kirsten, I'd love to kick off with you.
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the things that we have probably struggled with the most over the years is trying to really let our candidates know exactly what it is that they'll be joining. I think everybody has a vision of what M&S looks like to them, but when you get into the roles, they can look very different. And as I mentioned, we are a retail business. That's something that we really lead with. So when we are, what does that look like for everybody? And we've had lots of people turn up to assessment centre, even as far as their first day, not realising the role fully that they've come to. So that's been a big part of what we've been trying to do. I've recently joined with Connector to bring on this kind of like pre-boarding so that candidates can really see truly what the role is and self-select kind of in or out if that works for them. And so that for us has been a really big game changer. I would say from the last set of assessment centres, people were arriving, strangers are recognizing me immediately, like, oh, I've seen you on the platform, thanks for all the tips. And immediately it feels like they're familiar, they understand where we've kind of double checked in on some of the things. Everybody's been very clear, and that's been a real game changer for us this year. And I think from that side of things, it's really important. We feel like putting those extra steps in of really being able to give everybody the information at their fingertips, depending on how much or how less they want, has really helped them truly come to us knowing that this is the role they want, and being able to sort of step out of it's not, but show up knowing that this role is for them.
Awesome. And Amanda, how have you seen that sort of come through at Accenture? Have you found that people tend to do more research, or is it something that you're trying to facilitate, or both maybe?
Yeah, so I think from our perspective, the recruiters are definitely reporting that candidates are coming in a lot more informed. So where typically the interview would be one way, so the recruiter's asking questions and the candidate's just answering and maybe has one or two questions at the end, it's almost becoming like a reverse interview where at the end the candidate actually has so many questions, maybe it's something they've read online or something that they're interested in, asking even difficult questions about, stances on particular things and topics. And I think it just shows that, the research phase is getting a lot more granular. Like it's not just about, what are my work hours? It is like what you said, Molly, it's about, okay, what does this company stand for? What do I get outside of just like the typical package? And it is just, I think, more about closing that expectations versus reality, or expectations versus experience gap. And candidates are really keen to kind of know what's on offer as early as possible and help them with that decision making. So that's definitely started coming in, like from an Accenture point of view.
Yeah. And I think that follows a general trend that we see, like Gen Z and to a slightly lesser extent millennials spend so much time online. You're so used to being marketed to, you understand everything about a product before you consider purchasing it. And I think that jobs and careers have become a little bit more like that. It's so much
Exactly.
more than just a job, and people want to understand your stance on various different things that could be political or could be diversity related. There is a lot more discerning sort of research that tends to happen that we never would have expected to happen 10 years ago.
Absolutely.
And Yasmin, what are your views on this trend?
Yeah, I mean, to echo what Amanda and Kirsten have said, really, the two words I put down were scrutiny and savviness. Like that's, I think, what we're seeing is, and I would say it's more about the process. Like they have so much knowledge about the process, like you said, Amanda. They're coming into interview and they're using that as a chance to have a two-way conversation. I see a lot of active conversation, especially with Gen Z, about how you approach the application process, how you approach interviews. But they are, under a lot of pressure as well to find a job. It's quite a competitive market at the moment, especially in early careers. So, there is that extra savviness there. And I know I hate to drop this in so early as well, but I think AI is having a bit of an impact, like the way in which people research, especially younger people now, and the type of output they get from that. It's more granular, it's more conversational. They're able to just type a question in and get their answers without even going to your careers website. So the way that research is happening, I think, is shifting a lot as well.
Yeah, and I think it shows that people care a lot more about alignment and fit when it comes to their next career. And I think it used to be that you would consider employer brand as having to be overwhelmingly positive. You wanted to attract as many people as possible. You wanted everybody to think that you were the perfect employer of choice. Whereas actually now, employer brand is just as important in terms of putting people off, the wrong people off, as it is attracting the right people, because otherwise you are just absolutely inundated with sometimes irrelevant applications. And it's all about maximizing that efficiency and making sure that you find the perfect people and that the perfect people find you. You mentioned there, Yasmin, around obviously like different forms of content and different forms of discovery. So I'd love to kind of jump into some ideas around the differences between employer brand and recruitment marketing content, maybe that works for a really quick 5-minute browse using ChatGPT, or a 2-hour kind of deep dive into all of your culture, maybe prepping all of those interview questions that we're seeing coming up. So I'd love to come back to you because that's a lovely segue.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I think in the same way that we've got kind of the split of people who are going for a quick, high impact 5 minutes, I just want the facts and I'll make a decision, versus those kind of deeper researchers, you do need both longer form and shorter form content. I think for the deeper research, it is way deeper into the culture, way deeper into like role specific content, so that they can really visualize themselves working at your company, doing that specific role, like Kirsten said, having actually a practical sense of what that actually looks like. For those who are maybe only going to give you 5 minutes, that's where I think your like short form video content could be quite impactful, and kind of more social media style content where it is designed to be consumed really quickly. And you've got to get that across all your channels, and it's in a growing space. But you've got your socials, your Glassdoor reputation, your careers sites, your attraction partners. It's a lot of work to get that kind of message out consistently across all those spaces. But I think variety is the key here in terms of length and format and depth.
And Amanda, what would your views be in terms of recruitment marketing and how you serve both those like super deep dives, but also the just like very quick, I just need to do a search and make sure that I definitely do want to apply to this place?
Yeah, I think it's really similar to what Yasmin said. So from the short form, we're starting to do a lot more of that day in the life content. We find that works quite well when people just want to see like, what does this person do? What's the role like? Social posts, just really quick and short form videos for people that just want to literally browse, find out a little bit about the company, and then go on to the next one, which typically for us tends to be grads who tend to be applying to multiple grad schemes, right? So they don't have that much time to deep dive into every single company. But then you have the other end where people actually are really interested and want to get under the bonnet a little bit more. And there we have so many reports like on the website, just a lot more detailed content where somebody has to sit down and maybe digest it, or longer form interviews with like the industry leads within the business or group leads, whatever that looks like. But it's not a minute, like it's actually a 20-minute video or 30-minute video where you need to be engaged to really watch that. And I think it's really important, like Yasmin said, to have both and serve both of those audiences.
Totally. And I think there's also a really interesting role that companies are playing increasingly around like opening up what all the different jobs are within the workplace. Because I remember coming out of university and you didn't really know much more than like you could go into marketing or sales or finance. Like it was the big buckets. You didn't realize how much variety there is in those day-to-day roles. And so I think it's also a wonderful chance to be able to educate and show that there is so much nuance within the workplace, and that somebody may never have heard of a role before, but it's a perfect fit for them.
Yeah.
Kirsten, would you add anything in terms of that sort of like different forms of content and how to really appeal to people?
No, I think the girls said it all, but I think ultimately, the key is having something for everybody, because you're exactly right. Those people who just want everything in a nutshell, and those that also want the nutshell, but then the deep dive as well, but not feeling like the person who wants the short content needs to go down the deep dive. So it's a hard balance, isn't it, to make sure that you've got everything kind of in one video that they need to know, versus enough content for people to kind of go off and find. But it's I think you're right as well. Like for our roles, they're really generic. So we're just like food. Like what does that mean? And so to go down and start having a real look at actually what that means is really important, because again, you've got like the job description and the short videos that kind of give you an idea, but there's obviously way more to it. So it's finding the balance, but being able to give all the content. And it changes as well, what it looks like now versus what it could look like next year, versus what even the business may look like. Things like that is hard. So again, it's a tough balance, but it makes it so important, and it's one of the reasons why it's so valuable.
Yeah, and we see those behaviors really reflected in terms of how our users interact with Flexa as well. So often people will come on and will be the sort of first port of call for people to curate a list of like, maybe these are the top 10 places I'd love to work. And that will happen super quickly. They'll put their filters on. They'll say, I want a place that's open to early careers. I'd love to work in the office 3 days a week, but home from 2. And I really value sustainability and a mission-driven culture, for example. And all of those companies will then come up. And we'll see that happen super fast. And then people will then come back and spend a lot of time analyzing those profiles, like looking, okay, what is their approach to diversity inclusion? What is their approach to sustainability? And really dig into the kind of employee generated content that people put out there and try to really prepare themselves, I think, for interview and understand, is this company the right fit and what questions should I be asking? I suppose that brings me on to a sort of adjacent question around, I definitely feel that when people do their research and then they apply to a role and you're interviewing them, you can feel how much more excited and sort of aligned to that opportunity they are. And it comes across incredibly impressively. Like, we just had a CV come in and they'd formatted it like a Flexa company profile. Obviously, you're going to stand out doing that. And even though we're not hiring for that role, we were like, we'll absolutely stay in touch if we do end up doing that. And so I think, would you say that people that really do their research and bother to kind of get into the nuances of things stand out more as candidates? Amanda, I'd love to hear your opinion on that.
I think absolutely. Like, I mean, I mentioned earlier about how a lot of candidates, especially early careers, they're applying to loads of different grad schemes. So sometimes you do get applications that are very clearly like, this is ChatGPT. Like,
Yeah.
you've not even tried. And sometimes, like, even little things like, you've not even changed the company name. So you're so busy that you've just had to just quickly do a copy and paste. So that kind of I guess speed that people are working at can be quite detrimental. So when somebody does stop and you can like tell that, hang on a minute, this person's put a lot of different thought, like a lot of thought into it, different ideas, or presenting it quite differently, immediately stand out from the bunch, because you're looking at, like, back to back different applications. So it's really, really important, I think, from a candidate perspective, to make sure that you can stop and pause and just know that just know that it's quite important to tailor it really to the company that you're applying to.
Yeah, totally. Kirsten, would you agree that it's a great opportunity to stand out as well?
Yeah, absolutely. As I mentioned, like, we found that the candidates that came to our assessment centres earlier in the year really stood out when they had done their research. And what we found, we actually have, through the platform, we have advocates. So candidates who are currently on our cohorts are kind of there for messaging if the candidates who are coming to assessment centre at any point, or even past a certain stage, at any point want to reach out and understand more from somebody who's currently in the role, and other people in the business as well, they can reach out to them at any time. And what we found was that candidates who were successful had sent double the amount of messages to those who weren't. And that wasn't something that wasn't they had to have done. That was actually just the natural research that we found from the data. So that just showed, again, those who were more prepared, those who had deep dived, those who had done more, did obviously then stand out fully and succeed.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's really valuable advice around, obviously, when particularly in early careers, you're dealing at such volume. There are so many people. And so it really is an opportunity to genuinely stand out, and the data's in your favor as well there. Yasmin, you must agree, given the whole mission of your organization, of what you do. I guess, do you have anything to add on that?
I think just from sort of an evidence perspective, one of our client partners, we've just been analysing their data, and their candidates, we found those who interacted with their content, I think they were like 3 times more likely to receive an offer than those who didn't. So, based on that, what Kirsten and Amanda are saying, like, it's a very definite yes. It does matter, and it does make a difference.
Yeah, and I think to that point of the kind of use of AI, and when it feels very generic, like, AI is an incredible tool to be able to make your job hunt more efficient, but you can't rely on it entirely to be able to write those kind of personalized cover questions or cover letters or whatever it might be, because it is sadly quite obvious. Super. That was really useful, I think, particularly for anybody that is a candidate listening in the audience. So we now know that about 45% of candidates trust first-hand employee experiences, hence why things like Glassdoor and those reviews exist. But how do you scale authentic employee advocacy without it feeling manufactured? I think it's something that so many organizations are looking to do, is develop more employee advocacy. And I've seen some amazing examples of it, the sort of very organic day in the lives or people sharing about their own experiences, like in terms of career progression on LinkedIn. But I've also seen some terrible examples of it where you've got people standing incredibly awkwardly in front of like the office logo, saying what a great day they've had. So what advice would you give to people in terms of generating authentic employee advocacy content? I will start with you, Yasmin.
Yeah, so this is something we're particularly kind of passionate about at Connector, and our technology is kind of centered around this as a concept. As you mentioned, like not manufacturing it is definitely the key. Whoever you ask to be involved in this, it needs to they need to have a sense of a freedom of expression to a degree. And I know this is really difficult for larger companies, like especially when you're talking about things that are going out into the public and what people can and can't say, but as much as possible, not putting too many rules, requirements, and scripts on this. Especially with early careers, like young people know best how to communicate with other young people. So letting them control the script and the format a little bit is going to work really well for that. The other thing is obviously in terms of scaling up, you need tech for that, whether that is, video platform, social media, or a platform like ours, or even like Flexer. Doing things like digital mentoring or digital ambassadorship allows you to reach a lot more people at once. And you need to be, I think, strategic about where you do it. Like, it's an amazing thing, employee advocacy, but you don't need it throughout every single step of your kind of recruitment journey. So it's really about looking at where are the most kind of critical points for you as a business that you can deploy this, because it can be a little bit resource intensive. So it needs to be done strategically. Don't just kind of throw it out there. It's got to have a purpose.
Yeah, totally agree with that. And Kirsten, how do you get employee advocacy involved in all of the kind of marketing that you do for early careers?
Yeah, absolutely. And as I mentioned just now, we have our advocates on our platform. So essentially, once you've passed the, certainly as it stood last recruitment season, once you'd passed the online testing and you're waiting to hear about assessment centre, that's when you would have access to the platform and be able to kind of go a bit more in a deep dive. But that's where you would have access to be able to message one. As I say, we're made up of people around the business who sort of did some of the key roles that you may do as on the programme, but also anybody who maybe had been in any mix of anybody. And interestingly, we were talking to one of the advocates the other day about the amount of messages that he'd received, and how do you keep it authentic when you're getting the same message? Imagine you might have in one day, you might have 10 people ask you what do you do on a day-to-day, and how do you answer that without it becoming really robotic and really and I hadn't thought about that. And he said, well, just on the given day, I just tell them what I did that day. And it's like, actually, when you approach it like that, you can't get much more authentic than that, just saying, well, today I did this, this and this. And he said, sometimes that would stop dead the conversation. You could tell, okay, no, not interested. But then you'd get the people who then want to ask more, and how does that work? And that's when you could see that people really were either self-selecting out or really interested in and further deep diving.
Yeah, I think that's really valuable advice. And Amanda, how do you weave employee advocacy in?
So we really do love employee advocacy, both for early talent and for experience hire. I think the main thing is just finding the right people. Like an example, we've recently done an advocacy program for early talent, and we gave them, hey, this is kind of like a starter pack. This is, the tone of voice, this is what to use, this is kind of like the different things that you can talk about. But what we found as like the campaign progressed is that the people that were doing really well were actually not really talking about the kind of the guidance that we gave them. They weren't talking about that. They were actually just being really honest and saying, "Hey, this is like a really cool project that I'm working on," or it was very individual. And I think it goes to show how important it is to be authentic. So finding people who are really comfortable with advocacy, a really important part of it is just like that unique voice and that unique person, and what they bring. And actually, we don't want you to sound the same as how our corporate page might sound. Even though we gave these these pointers and this guidance, it's really been clear about their own experience. That's the content that performs best.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Awesome. And I think I actually, when I was looking at some examples of employee advocacy the other day, I saw a really interesting approach that I've never seen any company do before. But they were effectively treating their employees a little bit like influencers if they wanted to opt in. I don't know if anyone else saw, there was a post about it on LinkedIn that went viral, and effectively paying for impressions. So not paying as in you would an influencer, like we're doing a campaign and it's X amount of money for you to post. But when people were posting, whether that was about a project, like it didn't have to be specifically about the company, then they were rewarded based on the impressions or the engagement that they got, which I thought was a really interesting way of incentivizing employee advocacy. Like obviously not possible in every company, but I think it's quite an interesting approach. And I think obviously particularly younger generations that are obviously used to posting that kind of content are going to opt into that. And it really encourages more of a look into the culture of the organization. I think what we kind of haven't touched on specifically with employee advocacy is around how powerful it can be for attracting the right people. So when we think about diversity and inclusion and who we want to attract into an organization, it is effectively impossible to attract in talent if they feel there is absolutely no representation of people like them, right? So I live with an autoimmune disease. I actually ended up losing my job in investment banking because sometimes I can't walk. And I never would have then gone to another organization where I couldn't see examples of some people working in a hybrid way because I felt like I couldn't trust it. And we've got billions of data points at Flexa now around, what do working mothers really look for in their next organization? What do people with disabilities or ethnically diverse candidates? We can really break it down to being super granular. And what we've seen companies do with that data is then take that and go, okay, well, I know that if I need to increase the number of senior women in my leadership team, I need to be shouting about these benefits. So let's find a person who's got that story, who's utilizing, was it part-time or compressed hours or certain benefits, putting that across social media, really leaning on that as an employee advocacy story. And then it's really interesting to see how perceptions shift and how the attraction of certain groups can totally change based on understanding the data behind what people are looking for. And it's a really authentic way to be able to improve representation of different groups within your talent pipeline. And I think it's probably one of the most powerful and natural ones because you have to have it already, right? Because if you can't see it, then ultimately you can't be it. So thinking about the fact that really we're quite saturated by job platforms and seeing job descriptions, you go on to Indeed, there are hundreds of thousands of them, you're comparing employers side by side. It's very difficult to differentiate, particularly if you're a candidate, and I think particularly if you're early careers as well and you're looking at multiple kind of grad schemes. So in a market where candidates are comparing multiple employers side by side super quickly, how do you ensure that your brand stands out from competitors? Amanda, I'd love to come to you because I think it's a really interesting question given the industry that you're in.
Yeah, yeah. And of course, like it's quite a big industry. There's lots of competition. So I think the main thing that we try to do is to actually be completely transparent in terms of like our employer value proposition. So who we are, what we do, what you kind of what's that exchange. So when you work here, what can you expect? And really laying the cards out on the table. And it's something that I'm not going to say we've arrived, but we're definitely on a journey, and that's what we want to do to get to a place where it's really, really easy for someone to go onto the website or wherever and just find out exactly who we are and what we do and how to apply. But I also think something that we've also started really looking at is how to make it easy for people that might not be the right fit to say, actually, no, this is not the right place for us. Like you said earlier on, like it's so easy for us to just kind of like pretend, like companies to pretend, yeah, this is great, like everybody come and join us. But then you get so many applications, everybody's just drowning in applications, and most of them aren't even the right type of candidate. So really and truly, we want to be the employer of choice for the right target market. And I almost like compare it to like, if you're in a dating situation, you want to put your cards out on the table and say, hey, this is who I am, this is what you're going to get. Are you interested? So it's the same with the employer value proposition or like employer branding. Hey, this is who we are, this is what you're going to get. Are you interested? Are you the right person? If not, then okay, bye. If you are, then please apply. We really, really want you on board, and like, let's start on that journey. So I think, yeah, to kind of go back to the question, how we stand out is just by being truthful and actually not trying to pretend to be something we're not, because that obviously causes issues way down the line when somebody starts, the job and doesn't like it, or it's not the right fit. Just being really authentic, and then knowing that that has the power to draw the right candidates to your company.
Totally. And that's about optimizing for that alignment and that right fit rather than volume of applications, right? You want to find the right people. And I think that transparency piece is super powerful. And we've seen in some research that we've done that companies that are transparent with what's on offer in terms of being clear, location, hours, what the benefits are, what the culture is, are 4 times more attractive to prospective talent. So when you're thinking about trying to differentiate from competitors, if you've got that all out on the table, similar to a dating profile, then you automatically are going to win best talent. Kirsten, I'd love to come to you for your thoughts on it.
Very similar. I feel like Amanda said everything that I was going to say, but exactly right. And it's good to know that that's ultimately of a similar sort of information that we're going for. And one of our behaviours that we stand over is that we tell it how it is, and that's really important to us. So we wouldn't want to come across anything other than authentic, and this is who we are. But as I mentioned earlier, it's so important to be realistic as well, because sometimes, especially in the space of our retail leaders programs, which are in store, and they can be tough. So it's really important that we don't paint a picture that isn't exactly as it is. And we'd love, we want people to make sure that ultimately, if they're out to be a retail leader, then absolutely, please join us. This is everything. But is it right for you? And if it isn't, then absolutely don't apply. But if it is, then please welcome and kind of go for it. Also explaining, I think sometimes there can be some stigma around retail of people thinking they know what it is, and it's essentially just stacking shelves, or whatever they maybe have thought in the past. But actually, running a store can be like running your own business, and when you start to sort of show some of the rewards, it may sort of make people think, oh, I'd not thought about that as a career before. So it's I think I mentioned earlier about getting the balance, but it really is important about that authenticity and kind of, like you say, laying it all out on the table. This is what it is. This is who we are. But again, having the ability to be able to do that as well. So using the platform, being able to say, like we said, you can either see that in a nutshell, or you can deep dive into whether it really is for you. And if it is, like, these are all the benefits. These are one of the reasons why you should come and do this here with us. Is just so important, especially for us in that industry. It's really important.
Yeah, and I think the being honest and transparent also means that you get people staying for longer. Your retention rates are much higher. You've got higher performance as well. Like, ultimately, it saves the company money, even though it might feel like, I think a lot of organizations feel like it's a bit risky to be super transparent. Like, oh God, are people going to join because we've got amazing mat leave? No. That maybe happens in like this tiny fringe case of times where people will come and take the piss. But I think there's so much more worry about the risk of it than the actual real risk, because the reward totally outweighs it. And I think one interesting example that we have at Flexa, where we're very clear that we're, as you would expect, super flexible. We have a 4.5-day week. Everyone's off on a Friday afternoon. We have 45 days of holiday. We're remote first, work from anywhere scheme for, well, kind of play it by ear. We really trust people to get things done. But one thing that we don't have is that true work-life balance of being able to be like, I can log on at 9 and switch off at 5. I think it's very hard to make that work with such flexibility. So we always say we do not have work-life balance. It's about work-life integration. So we'll only be the right company for you if you are happy to be, I'm going to go to the gym at lunchtime, but if somebody needs me at 7, I might have to log back on and send an email. And so it's those kind of people we want to be able to self-select in and be very clear about the kind of culture that we have, but also all of the things that we'll give back in return.
I think that's so important. Sorry, Molly, I know you're just about to ask, but I think that's really important, because I've had it in the past where, you read a job spec, you speak to people, and they're really dressing up the job to be something else. And then the moment you join, it's kind of like, oh, whoa, like,
Well, yeah.
this is not what I expected. So transparency to say, actually, we don't have work-life balance, we have work-life integration. I know so many people that would be like, that's great. Like, I absolutely love that. But some people would say, actually, no, thank you. That's not for me. And that's exactly what you want, right? For people to self-select. So I think that's really good.
Totally. And if I were looking for a job, if someone said, oh, it's work-life balance, we're on 9, leave at 5, I'd be like, no, it's not for me. So it's a really interesting thing, I think, to be able to appeal to the right people and avoid catfishing, for lack of a better term. There are so many dating analogies, but I can't remember, I think it was just after the pandemic, a study was conducted of all of the roles that were on LinkedIn, and then what they were saying they were versus what they actually were. And 68% of the remote roles that were advertised as remote were not remote. 68%. Isn't that amazing?
That's crazy.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
Yasmin, I'm conscious that I haven't asked you about, how do you really stand out when people are in such a saturated market looking at so many different employers?
Yeah, so I mean, definitely for the employers I speak to, I'd say for most people, finding applicants is not the problem. It's finding the quality within the quantity. And very much our platform is utilised in that way, that self-screening out that you mentioned, Amanda. So we're encouraging this sort of reflective behaviour of, as I'm learning about these two companies and I'm reflecting about myself, which one feels like a good fit. And actually the Marks and Spencer Connector platform and the Accenture Connector platform were both deployed kind of with this purpose in mind. I had transparency down as a key point here, which you both touched on. But I think it is about the experience itself is what's going to stand out. So all of those touch points and how they've come to learn about you. Have they interacted with something that's maybe a bit dubious like that, or they've seen something that doesn't seem quite right, or have they felt kind of informed throughout? Because I think it may be that from a salary and benefits perspective, you're pretty like even with somebody else. But if one employer is offering this amazing kind of curated and kind of supportive experience for candidates, that is what's going to separate them from someone who might just have a similar package. It's the overall experience, I think, that can make you stand out as well.
Yeah, totally. And I think increasingly hiring is becoming much more like a marketing funnel. In the middle, you've got that consideration.
Agree.
Obviously, what your tech helps with, Yasmin, in terms of like, you've thought about applying there, what's on offer, how do you keep people really engaged, really understanding as they go through those processes to becoming an employee. And then obviously you've got that kind of conversion down there at the bottom, interviews, how do people engage, how do you keep that transparency open. But I think only really recently, when we look at employer branding and recruitment marketing, has there been as much of a focus on the very top of funnel, like how do people discover you? And Kirsten, you mentioned a really interesting challenge there around, we often see that there is a certain perception around organizations that are household names or well known within an industry. And so people will either go, yes, it's definitely the place for me, or immediately discount it. But I think there's such an opportunity at that very top of funnel when we look at discovery of how do companies sort of get away from their perceptions and away from their brand and actually get discovered for all the things they offer and why they would be a great fit for someone. And we're seeing an increasing number of people on Flexa do that behavior from the candidate side. So they've stopped searching quite as much specifically for jobs, and they're looking specifically for companies. So they're putting those filters in, and then those organizations come up. And we had some really interesting feedback about a defense client of ours who have amazing benefits for women and returning mothers, but like you wouldn't guess that. And someone fed back and said, Flex is the quickest way to change my mind about a company, because I discovered them not by searching for their name, but by searching for the things that I wanted, which I think is really interesting, of like how you get that name out there, whether that is the day in the life, really engaging content on TikTok when someone's just scrolling, they're not expecting that to be a company, or whether it's being on Flexa, or whether it's out of home or different careers fairs. I think there's so many different places to really focus at that pure top of funnel and awareness to get inside the memories of people that maybe wouldn't consider you as an employer of choice. So I think it's a really exciting time to be thinking about it from a really, really top of funnel perspective and bringing that marketing lens in. But nice segue into naturally that requires a lot of data, a lot of analysis, and a lot of number crunching to know what's working. So my next question for you, Kirsten, actually, how are you using data and analytics to understand what candidates want, and then how does that inform your strategy?
I think one of the great things is the amount of data that we've now kind of got at our fingertips. And certainly this year, we've really dived into kind of our end of season pack, and what we can see is where some of the demographics have dropped off, like where people have started, and then where they maybe started the application and then not even continued from there. And you think, well, why would they even fill out an application if they weren't going to do sort of the first test? And I think again, there's so much we have used from that data to then be able to look at the strategy for this year to say, okay, where do we need to fill in those gaps? Where are people saying, where are we clearly not giving enough information? You know, we've talked a lot about how great we are about being authentic and telling everybody what we want to tell them, but ultimately there are gaps, and we want to really be able to make sure that, exactly like what you've said, you know, even that immediate perception, it might just be even that the first activity that they've been faced with, they've gone, no, thank you. But again, if there was enough at the front end to tell them why they should do it, that may change their mind. And, you know, again, using the platform, when we talk about sort of our platform that we use to give that transparency, what more content, again, can we put on there to make sure that we are putting something there for everybody and being as transparent as possible? Again, things like our benefits, they're on there, but have we truly gone into depth about our great maternity policy? You know, potentially not, and things like that, that maybe there are ways that we can get into that. So yeah, for us, we use data really heavily to show us kind of where those gaps are and where we can be more transparent, because we haven't got it quite right, but we're definitely on our way.
Yeah, and all of that tracking and building up all of that information is the key to a really solid foundation of being able to, in time, pick out those holes and know where you can really optimize.
Yeah, absolutely.
Awesome. And Amanda, how do you use data kind of throughout that funnel and to understand, you know, what people are looking for and whether it's working for you?
Yeah, I think it's similar to what Kirsten said, but we look at what candidates say and do. So the kind of first part is like just feedback throughout the process. You know, how was the process for you? How did you find it? But also just that behavior analysis. So looking at, you know, the actual stats and the data. Where are people dropping off? What keywords are people searching for? How long are they spending on what page? And you know, what do they do after that page? Do they click onto another page? So just tracking and actually just using that to refine our messages, to change our messages if we need to update them. For example, like it's quite good to give a real life example. Recently, we looked at some of the job ads that we have for some of the grad schemes, and we had a small group of current grad schemes, and we just said, hey, can you look at this with a fresh pair of eyes and just let us know what you think? Is it clear what this means? Is it clear what the person will be doing? Is it appealing? You know, how does this compare to other job ads that you might have seen? And then taking that feedback on and actually saying, okay, let's go away and now in the process of updating some job ads, because we're seeing that actually where we find it really easy and clear, it's not transferring to the market because, you know, they might not understand, you know, what we're saying. So just being able to know that actually your value, your proposition, your brand is always going to be changing and evolving. So you have to continually look at the data, and listen to feedback, incorporate that into what you're doing. So yeah, that's how we do that.
Yeah, that's awesome. That sort of live testing, because you stare at the same thing every day. Like, you know how to sell Accenture because you've done it many, many times. But
Yeah.
is it then resonating with the different groups? Like, I think that's a really smart thing to do, is put it back into the hands of people that know. Yasmin, do you have anything to add on that?
Yeah, I think something I'm definitely hearing a lot, especially for those in the employer brand space, is actually the kind of analytics and the metrics they're looking at are really similar to what a marketer would look at. You know, you're almost looking at things like SEO and kind of behavioral analysis and things like that. We've definitely been doing a lot more with our partners in quite a deep kind of behavioral analysis, where we're looking at, you know, what content and what messaging has been interactive with the most and how that's converted into actual job offers as well. So joining that whole journey up, where did they start, which touch points did they interact with in order to convert, and then ideally then later on 6-12 months down the line, are they still in the business? So you've got quite a wide timeline to be looking across, to see if things are successful, because you want them to come into the business and stay in the business. So you know, it's quite a long journey, but being able to kind of connect up all of your kind of approaches, systems, whatever you're using, and see that transition from each stage through into kind of converted candidates has been quite important.
Yeah, and it's wonderful that, you know, we can do that now. I think that would have been a dream 5 to 7 years ago, of being able to track that behavior. And we see it as well from what we measure at that very top in terms of discovery, like how many people how many companies have been discovered, what have they been discovered for, what were people searching, all the way through to then, you know, how long did people spend looking at that profile, what different bits were they looking at, what resonated, what made them click, and really being able to track that from the first time they've laid eyes on a company, or maybe come back and reconsidered, all the way through to, what you're doing in terms of 6-12 months later, are they still there and performing? So I'm conscious of time and making sure that we have enough time to answer questions. So to wrap up the discussion and then move on to our audience questions, I'd love each of you to share one piece of advice for our audience. So if there's one thing you want employers to remember when they're thinking about all of these behavior shifts that we've mentioned in terms of the amount of research that's being done in different formats, or one action that they could take, what advice would you give them in terms of adapting? Kirsten, I'll go to you first.
I think we've spoken about it loads today, but again, I'd say it's that authenticity piece, and using your current candidates. Well, if you're in early careers and you've got cohorts, then absolutely use those guys to spread the word, because that authenticity, I mean, they're just don't need training at that point, that they're happy to just tell, and they will say it as it is. And if you don't have graduate schemes or apprenticeship schemes, then you will have, again, sort of direct entry roles that you're filling and a similar sort of group of people that are quite happy to go out there and really spread the word and really share their experiences. And whilst colleague stories are brilliant across the board, again, I just think that coming straight out of reasonably new joiners' mouths will always be of interest to people, and again, that authenticity is really, really strong. So that's the one thing I would say. We've got it at your fingertips, it's just using it.
Totally agree with that. And Yasmin, what would your piece of advice be?
Yeah, I mean, I imagine I'm preaching to the converted with this audience a little bit, but I think trying to do this across all of your hiring, it's incredibly overwhelming, and I would definitely encourage people to do kind of journey mapping. So thinking about your audiences, whether that's experienced hires, specific early careers demographics, or kind of like armed forces or whatever that might be, looking into those audiences at their touch point, mapping out where they interact with you, how they interact with you, and where your gaps are, so that you can prioritize, okay, this is where we're missing a bit of advocacy. This audience, there's no representation of them within our advocacy program. Let's increase that here. Or there's no content that speaks to this audience. Let's add that here. And then work to your kind of strategic priorities with that. I think that can take away some of the sense of we have to do everything for everyone all the way through. So take a step back and look at that big picture, do a workshop through it, get some sticky notes out and just map it all out.
Yeah, awesome. Very interactive.
Mm.
Amanda, what advice would you give?
I would say just the power of clarity. I think when we look at research-driven candidates, they just want to know. They just want the information, right? They want to know who you are, what you do, what you're offering, essentially. So I think it's really important to be clear. Don't make anything overly complex. Just simplify. Just get the message across. And I think the main thing is that clarity builds trust. And once you have that trust, the candidate is better informed to make the decision about whether this is the right place for them to work or not.
Yeah, totally agree with that. And I think my advice, not that anyone asked, would be
we are interested though.
Exactly.
to try to put as many people off as you're trying to attract. I think it works wonders later down the line, whether you're looking at acceptance rates, there are not going to be any surprises there, whether you're looking at people embedding in the first 3 months, whether you're looking at people who've then worked for you for 2 or 3 years. Obviously, it's an unusual situation, like we're a startup, so I see from the very first point of our employer brand all the way through to the high performing employees 3-4 years later. And the massive thing that the really successful people throughout that whole thread have in common is that their expectations were aligned. And that has come from having those conversations around what work-life balance versus work-life integration means, what the expectations are of things that I think often companies are sort of scared of being explicit about, such as we do have a culture of having Slack on your phones. And we will say that rather than saying, you can sort of opt out and not have that on there. And it's those really specific things that really affect what your culture is. We are fast-paced and fun. We're not serious and traditional. There's lots of opportunity to get involved in loads of things, which isn't always what people want. Some people don't want to go outside of their job description. So we're very, very clear about the things that we know are Marmite for some people, but also some people love it, some people hate it. And I think that has been hugely important to the success of our high performers, was always being aligned on that. So we've got loads of questions and I want to make sure we've got lots of time to answer. So what I'll do is I'll pick the person that I think it's probably best suited to, and then I'll ask if anybody else wants to add anything. So we just get through them in the sort of 10 minutes, if that works. So Will asks, do we have any advice for measuring if candidates self-select out still have a positive view of your brand? That's quite a difficult one, isn't it? I don't know if anybody has any kind of tips there in terms of, does anybody do sort of brand perception understanding, like with external suppliers, M&S or Accenture?
We haven't done one in a while, but typically we would. So I guess just to kind of give a very generic answer, I think measuring your brand impact, so looking at exactly like brand mapping, and just how that looks year on year, you'll be able to kind of see a clear picture. I also think asking, so because typically when people self-select, they might have already started the application, they might have like maybe entered the first stage. So just asking for feedback, why did you not proceed? And I think Kirsten, you mentioned that. So just getting feedback and saying, what your thoughts and where do you stand on that. So yeah, I think probably something around that.
And also making sure that your candidate experience is always excellent, because there's a very big difference between somebody opting out because of bad candidate experience versus somebody self-selecting out because it's not the right fit. And so you want to make sure that you have a lot of awareness of the former and make sure that that's highly unlikely, so that then you have a more positive perception, because you can realize that somewhere is not right for you, but still have had a good experience, right? So thank you very much, Will. I thought it's a good question. And if anybody in the audience has built something to help us be able to do that, please let us know.
Yeah, if I can add to that, sorry, maybe not necessarily an answer, but I think if you're consumer-facing business, one of the things you might want to be looking at is like your consumer reputation with people who are both your candidates and your customers as well. We did a piece of work, British Airways, on this, where we did some kind of sentiment analysis. And that was able to let them know, are people going through this experience and leaving it with the right perception of them, and is it having a positive or a negative impact on the likelihood they might buy from that company again in the future?
And the social listening side of it as well, because now
exactly.
a lot of people will do TikTok, Reddit, Facebook. There's obviously different ways to be able to understand that. Very often people will voice their discontent if it's been a bad experience. Christine on LinkedIn asks, what are some of the more unusual or surprising employee advocacy stories that you've been able to unlock in your company? So I don't know if anything springs to mind in terms of someone that you've sort of highlighted, Kirsten, perhaps at M&S.
I was having a think about this actually, but I think that probably the obvious one for us is that what we found is in the past, our internal candidates have done particularly well at assessment centre because they have able to be able to go to their store manager and sit down with them and really get an idea of kind of what the role looked like. And that's one of the things that we tried to bring to life with our advocacy piece, was almost like the candidate, even to the point where some of our internal candidates would try and do the same thing, but maybe on that occasion the store manager wasn't available, or they had change in management, etc. So being able to bring that consistency to everybody, but also from sort of D&I's perspective, well, you might have some who sit down with somebody, a mentor, and say, so that's what the advocacy piece really brought to life. So it's not a specific story, but I suppose being able to kind of pick out something where it's worked and then replicate that from our advocacy piece is something that we really tried to achieve.
Yeah, I love that. And one of the organisations that we work with that springs to mind on this is TUI, and they do amazing work showcasing their work from anywhere scheme. They're a travel company. They give travel credits for employees to be able to use, like really quite generous travel credits, and then let people work abroad. And they are so good at showcasing all of the holidays, what work people are doing on the work from anywhere scheme. So it's not just about fun; it's also about how you progress in your career while traveling the world. And I think it's one of the coolest kind of employee advocacy campaigns I've seen. Talia asks, have you had any pushback on the time it takes for employee advocacy away from a person's standard day job, and how have you navigated that? It's a very good question. Amanda, if I could come to you for that, maybe?
Yeah, so we actually haven't. I think one of the things that we've built around employee advocacy is making sure that we give as much as possible in terms of information. So I mentioned earlier we have like a pack almost. So if you're going to become an advocate, there's sort of a starter pack. Everything you need to know is in that pack. And then also we tend to have weekly meetings, so check-ins. They're really drop-in sessions. If you want to come in and have a chat and, have ideas about, what should I post, or how, basically evaluating how it's going, then, drop into that session. And that's all sort of built around making sure that people do feel like this is not a second job. Like, it's now not taking like hours and hours to draft posts and, think about what you're going to share. It really should be quite easy and seamless. And that should hopefully get more people interested and engaged with the program. So yeah.
Yeah, and if I could add to that as well, like something that a lot of our customers do when they're looking for advocates to go on their platforms is they might, depending on what you've got in place, use like volunteering hours and things like that that go towards it. So it feels like it's kind of signed off time by the business. It's okay for you to take this time and do this, and it's actually recognized as a part of your job and not an extra work on top.
Nice. Yeah, that's a really good idea as well as the paying for the impressions one. Wild. This one, Yasmin, I would like to come to you. It feels very relevant to the work that you do. So Harry asks, since candidates are doing more research than ever when they're looking for the next company, what's the approach to providing transparency they're looking for around benefits, culture, etc., in one place rather than leaving them to piece it all together from different sources?
Yeah, this is tricky because we're all in a lot of different channels now, and information does start to become a bit fractured, and that makes it super hard to manage as well. But it is about having some kind of a hub. So plugging the connector platform, that's very much what that does. You may use a different tool for it, but even just on your careers site is interlinking everything as much as possible, centralizing everything as much as possible. And this will depend on your team structure too, as long as you're kind of communicating internally that the same message is going out to those places. But you can surface LinkedIn or TikTok or Instagram content on another page and vice versa. So those things are kind of shared and distributed out, but it can get tricky. It does get fractured. I think this is why the mapping is really helpful, just to have a really kind of clear sense of who's owning what parts of the experience, what channels, what platforms, and how are you working together to communicate consistently.
Yeah, because it does get very confusing as well, because also from a company perspective, you'll have so many different pages that talk about different benefits. They change, keeping all of that updated, different job description templates being used by different people, keeping it all very consistent is tough. And that's one of the things that we're trying to solve at that very top of funnel, is making sure that it's sort of like a searchable index of all of the things that a company offers in one place that is easy to update. It is a source of culture, working environments, benefits, the things that people really care about, because you can get lost in Glassdoor, LinkedIn, reviews, social media, everything. Really good question from Louisa on LinkedIn, which I would like to ask to both Amanda and Kirsten. How can candidates really show that they've done their research and impress you when it comes to interview? Amanda, I'll come to you first.
That is a really good question. I think the best way to show that you've done your research, I mean, it's going to sound quite generic, but to go above and beyond. I think there's sort of a base level research that everybody's going to do, like regardless of whether you're just applying quickly or you're taking your time. You're just going to look at kind of company website, maybe a few social media pages. But when you go above and beyond, it's maybe looking at specific reports and actually mentioning it when you're interviewing it, or if you're writing a cover letter. I guess dropping it in, making it really obvious that, hang on, I've read this, or this was my take on this post that you did, or I thought you could have done this differently, or I thought this was great, whatever that is, because we don't tend to see that often. So that immediately makes somebody stop and think, oh, okay, this person's actually really separate and like set apart from the rest of the group, because they've added something that you can't actually just quickly get from ChatGPT or whatever AI platform you might be using. And I think that's probably a really good way to stand out.
Yeah, totally agree with that. Kirsten, what advice would you give in terms of really standing out?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think what you touched on ChatGPT there, and I think a lot of people don't realize that when they start talking in something that ChatGPT has given them, how many times we've heard that before. Often when you hear I can answer to something, it's got a really ChatGPT feel about it, and often it'll be like, oh, I don't know if that's actually you've done that research or if you've got that from AI. Or so I would say again that authenticity piece is really, really genuine. But Amanda hit the nail on the head as well about making sure that you bring something up that maybe isn't just the norm. It's not something that you could just find. For us, I'm always surprised the amount of people that probably don't think too much about going into one of our stores. It's such a easy piece of research, but actually get into the building and have a look, talk to somebody who works there. It's right there. And a while ago, a couple of years ago, we used to do online assessments, and it would amaze me the amount of people who would join and hadn't been to an M&S store, and maybe popped on Ocado to have a look at some of our products. And it's almost like by being in online, it was okay for them to stay online to do research. And just the difference with the candidates who had gone in, which almost seems a bit crazy, because you're like, well, why wouldn't you? But yeah, I would say that for us, there is absolutely loads at your fingertips. The data that you are finding on ChatGPT might not be real. We have had situations before where people have come into an assessment centre and quoted very old information that perhaps they've got from somewhere that isn't up to date. And again, that will stand out. So the research that you're doing, make sure that it is up-to-date research that you've got directly from us, and directly, as I say, or from physically going into a store. Don't rely on ChatGPT giving you the answer, because there's a good chance that it won't be right, and then that will backfire, and then the work that you've done becomes null and void.
Yeah, totally agree. It's about grabbing people's attention at the end of the day. And if you're sounding like everybody else, then even though you might have the most brilliant skills and the best background, it's still really hard to stand out because it is very competitive. But thank you so much to Amanda, Yasmin and Kirsten for being such brilliant panelists and providing all of our insights. I've really enjoyed learning from all of you, and I know from all the comments that our audience has as well. So thank you so much for your time, and feel free to, definitely I'm happy for people to connect with me on LinkedIn and ask any further questions if you all are as well. But yeah, I thank you very much to everybody for listening and spending an hour with us today. I hope that you have a wonderful rest of the day.